What is the Freedom of Information Act?
The Freedom of Information Act is slightly misnamed. Strictly speaking, it should be called an Access to Documents or an Access to Information Act, because in one sense, freedom is your right to do something without being limited. So your freedom of speech is your freedom to say what you want without being subject to penalties from the government. The access to information right is a right of access to information held by the government, and the government has a correlative duty to provide you with that information. It started a long time ago in 1766 in Sweden, where they call it offentlighetsprincip, the publicity principle. Towards the end of the 20th century, other countries started to adopt the same kind of law. These laws have essentially three characteristics. One is that the right of access to information is a legal right, and it's a general right. That is to say, you do not have to prove that you have a need to know. It is your right because you're a person. Some countries say it's your right as a citizen, but the UK doesn't make that distinction. The second principle is that although there are exemptions, always, the exemptions must be fairly narrowly drawn. And the third basic principle is that if there is a dispute as to whether the information you have requested is exempt or not, there must be a right of appeal to an independent arbiter, an independent adjudicator. Now, this may be a judge in some countries. In the United Kingdom, it is the Information Commissioner who decides. But those are the basic principles of freedom of information.
How should I comply with the Act?
In terms of compliance, you don't have any duties under the Freedom of Information Act as a company. So the Act mostly affects you in terms of providing opportunities for you to get information about other companies, and also in providing, how should I put it, the possibility of complaining if information about you, which is held by a government department, is sought by someone else.
What information can I gain access to?
You can gain access to almost any information held by a public body. Now, in the earlier versions of freedom of information laws, they were usually in terms of documents. In fact, the French law was called the Access to Administrative Documents Act. The later laws changed the emphasis from documents to information because, especially with information technology, the concept of a discrete, separate document is less and less usable. So it's right of access to information, although frequently, of course, the information will be held in a document.
When will information not be given?
Information will not be given if it is in one of the exempt categories. Now, the exemptions are fairly uniform in all the countries that have adopted such laws. There's an exemption for national security, an exemption for law enforcement, an exemption for personal privacy, an exemption for commercial information in some circumstances. Those are some of the common exemptions. Now, some of the exemptions are subject to a harm test. That is to say, the information will be exempt from disclosure if the disclosure would cause a specific kind of harm. Other kinds of information that will be exempt are information that is exempt because it belongs to a certain class. That is to say, the government doesn't have to show that the disclosure of this particular information would cause harm. It simply shows that it belongs to a class, such as, for example, some kinds of government information that would cause damage if any of the information in the class was disclosed. It's a distinction between a contents and a class exemption.
Are there any exemptions under the Freedom of Information Act?
Yes, there are always exemptions. Although they vary from country to country, there is a fairly standard set of common exemptions. There's an exemption for national security, an exemption for information that would impair law enforcement, an exemption for information relating to natural persons, that is personal privacy, an exemption for commercial confidentiality, an exemption, and this varies from country to country, for advice given in confidence in government. But those are the basic exemptions in almost all countries.